positions of hopelessness and helplessness. The government gives them the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America. No, no, no. Not God Bless America. God damn America. That's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God damn America for treating us citizens as less than human. God damn America as long as she tries to act like...
Anders Lee here. Welcome to Pod Damn America, here with my comrade Alex Patak.
Alex Patak here.
And our guest this week from across the pond, Hussein Kesvani.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us.
Do I get to be like the Jake Flores, like, stand-in today?
Yeah.
I mean, it is a privilege, but yes, that is what you're doing right now.
Should we do that
How does it
again?
feel?
I'm excited.
We have Jake Flores has adopted a British accent. He's stealing valor from the Brits, appropriating British culture. But you're physically here in the United States.
I'm physically in the United States for like a few more days.
He's literally in my apartment right now.
Literally in the apartment.
You can't see it, but we're sharing headphones like we're on a bus and in love.
Yeah, it reminds me of like being a teenager and like sharing a Walkman.
I made you this playlist. It's mostly Anders Lee.
I do kind of wonder whether that's like the equivalent of teens today. Like, here, share an AirPod with me, and we can listen to the same podcast.
Hey, I made you a TikTok. Take this headphone, and we can see this guy cry while he dances to music. I've only seen the one. I don't know TikTok. We're moving on.
My girlfriend, which I do have, we have shared a headphone.
Congratulations.
From time to time,
Anders.
we listen to podcasts together in transit that way.
That's great, man.
Hussein, let me ask you, is this your first time in the States? And what do you think of it so far?
No. So I was here this time last year, but not in New York City, in New York State.
Where'd you go?
I was teaching in SUNY, Albany.
Oh.
So I was in New York City for 2 days.
The big city.
The greatest city in the world, as I've heard. And I was teaching at SUNY Albany and doing a fellowship there. And it was just very weird because it was like, on the one hand, I was very worried about like the colonial like elements of being in New York State, but on the other hand, I was just like very bored. Like it was very hard to get around, and I guess like when we went to like the mall, and that was it. So I had like a very American mall experience.
Did you try any oxycodone while you were up there?
No, I mean I did like whippets.
Yeah,
like an American
very
thing. But,
metropolitan of you.
But also I come from London where like everyone does fucking whippets anyway. Like they
and
just, like,
cat
and whippets. But if you go to like to any, so if any of your like listeners ever come to London and they come to East London, which is where the Trash Future office is, like you'll just see these little kind of like canister, like whippet canisters everywhere you go. It's almost like that fairy tale. Is it Hansel and Gretel?
Yeah,
except like with whippets,
where the children leave whippets in a trail.
Yeah.
And it goes to a witch's house, and that witch is Jake Flores. Well, I'm glad you're having such a scenic New York experience.
Yeah, New York City is it's a different place in many ways. It's a land of contrasts, as they say.
New York, you different. Thanks for showing out. Well, we are here this week mostly to talk about your home. It's your big week.
It is a big week. When does this come out?
Probably Thursday.
Okay, it is a big day on Thursday.
It's a big day.
The course of history.
Thursday is a holy day in the UK. We all do whippets and no, it's a UK election and it's a pretty big one. I don't know how much like I feel what I'm being really surprised about is actually there's a lot of people in New York who are very well informed about like this election. I met someone the other day who like knew loads about like these marginal constituencies and like I didn't know any of it. I was just like, yeah, okay, cool. Like,
that is a big issue.
It's a big thing, and I'm curious as to
you're
like,
keyed into it, and I'm keyed into it.
I'm curious as to like why. I mean, I guess in one way I understand, which is like this is the first time that a truly like I wouldn't say like I guess a truly left wing by relative standards like might act, like has like a real shot of kind of getting into like power and like making some real changes. And I guess there's also like the kind of Boris Johnson Trump connection in the way that like they both sort of mirror each other in more ways than I'd be comfortable with.
So when you say you're running into a New Yorker who knows more about the election than you are running into Anders Lee?
Yeah, I mean, probably. Hey, I thought I recognized you.
I think most of us still know absolutely fucking nothing about your election, but
it could be just like a very well informed like I do like taking the subway in Brooklyn and kind of just like trying to guess how many bearded guys like have podcasts, and how many of them are just kind of like dog walkers.
You can do both.
I'm sure there's like a crossover.
Yeah, usually both.
I thought I like saw Matt Chrisman from Chapo.
It's really disorienting. Like once you meet Matt and like a few like really successful podcasters, you're like, this is a good life. You don't realize that it's all dog walkers.
But he's in my country. He's in Liverpool.
Yeah.
So I was just like, this is just a guy who looks a lot like Matt from Chapo, but he like has this very small dog that he's like stroking in like his New Yorker tote.
Oh man, the hubris.
But yeah, like, you know, it's I think like it's a kind of bigger profile election than most. It's sort of been like a very surreal experience because it's been such like a short time frame. It's only been about like 6 weeks.
A lot keeps happening though.
Yeah.
The goofs and gaffs.
A lot keeps happening, but also there's a lot, you know, by relative terms, and this is also just because of like the length. There's like a lot of like mainstream reporters that are like, oh, you know, this is an election without like a lot of moments. And to a degree that was true, except until yesterday, which was Monday.
Moment mania.
So beforehand, like the Johnson campaign, the Tory campaign were like, they were trying to kind of really control everything. And that meant that like Johnson wasn't kind of doing a lot of like interviews, and there was a whole controversy around like him not doing kind of a particularly quote unquote tough interview with a BBC interviewer called Andrew Neil. I think that's kind of bullshit in the sense that like if you really dig into kind of who Andrew Neil is as a person, like he's much more aligned to Boris Johnson. He is the managing editor of the magazine that Boris Johnson used to edit. He's like a regular at like Spectator magazine, which is kind of like, I guess, the National Review of the UK. So they're kind of in the same side. It wouldn't have been like, I think, as tough an interview as people maybe would have wanted it to be, but it would have been tough compared to like the standards that like the Johnson press team have kind of been allowing him to be exposed to. And that's because Boris Johnson is a buffoon, and like he like is so kind of gaff prone that his team are just trying to kind of protect him as much as they can, and they kind of felt that like not putting him so much in the spotlight.
I tweeted this earlier. Do you feel like he has a similarity to Ed Sheeran, but like after he's hit with a small amount of force lightning? Like he just like everything's slightly off just a degree, like you've been blasted.
No, I don't. I get what you mean, but I feel like Ed Sheeran is just like a very well-meaning. He's like a well-meaning guy who's just kind of gotten in a bit too much over his head.
Sure, but his brain's been scrambled in this situation, along with the rest of his body.
No, I feel like with Boris Johnson, like he was like he didn't need the force lightning or anything to.
He's just like that,
right?
Yeah,
and I feel that's true. Like because Boris Johnson really is kind of an epitome of the British class system, right? This is a guy who like was born into a particular like landed dynasty. He went to Eton. He was the type of guy who
what is
really
because we hear this term Etonian, and it sounds like some sort of alien race or something.
Eton is like one of the oldest British private schools it's like one of the oldest private schools in the world, but it's one of like Britain's oldest private schools. It is a place where like it's kind of considered to be like a finishing school almost for anyone who kind of wants to be like, you know, working like be in government, be prime minister, etc. I think I can't remember the exact number, but there's like an obscene number of like prime ministers who have graduated from Eton.
They hook you up to a vacuum and it sucks the empathy out of you.
among other things, among other rumors.
The vacuum that sucks the empathy out of you.
Let's just say other things are probably getting sucked there too.
Yeah.
And it's an all boys school, so let's put 2 and 2 together. Because I'm not putting you in any libel situation right now.
Nice. Our laws are a lot weaker than yours. It's fine.
Right. And you don't have like, so I've got to give out a shout to like our producer Nate, who like makes sure that every time we say libel stuff that he removes it, because otherwise we would be like completely fucked by now.
Yeah.
But like, you know, Eton is very it sort of epitomizes like the British class system, and Boris Johnson is really the epitome of that in an exaggerated form. There are Etonians like, so David Cameron, who was a previous prime minister, he tried to distance himself away from his like Etonian background. So he tried to kind of be like, you know, cool and down with the kids and like into Kasabian and stuff like that. I don't know if any of your listeners know what Kasabian is.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
They're like a very, very like boring indie band. In the UK that were like really big in the mid 2000s, which was around like the beginning of the Cameron years.
Okay.
Or just like the time when Cameron kind of became leader of the Conservatives and tried to modernize it. Boris Johnson is a guy who like memorizes like lines from like Herodotus and stuff.
Right.
And
I've seen that one quote he has of in his free time.
Yeah.
He reads poetry in German. And
probably like paints like makes kind of wine crates into buses. Like he's a weird guy, and people are there are lots of kind of media people who are saying that, oh, he just says this because like he's like a bit eccentric or a bit weird, or like, you know, he's trying to be funny. It's like, no, this is the British class system.
Yeah.
We're all like fucking weirdos.
That's like the kind of excuse you make for your like messed up son. He's actually just being funny.
Well, speaking of that, they had his dad on one of those question shows, and they were asking him about his son, saying, I think, racist things. And
yeah, so there was a question time event at Channel 4, which is one of our like TV channel, like news channels, like one of the big ones. There was like an environment question time kind of event. So like Jeremy Corbyn was there, like the leader of Labour Party, Joe Swinson. I think Joe Swinson was. I mean, like, but they're basically like all the kind of party leaders. But Boris Johnson wouldn't go on. And again, this was like, I think because his team were like trying to kind of prevent him from doing too much public stuff.
He's too smart to be speaking the question time. You won't be able to handle it.
It's like, it's too much knowledge, too much.
He knows too many languages and cultures.
Yeah, it's like the stuff you've got to like pay the Patreon fee for. He's not giving that shit away for free. So they... So from what I know, also being here, like I kind of get like drips of information. They didn't kind of put anyone up until the last minute. And then at the last minute, they tried to get Michael Gove, who was an education secretary and now like environment secretary and all around just like shithead of a person to come in. And Channel 4 were like, okay, well, you know, we can't bring you on because all the other party leaders are here and this is a leaders debate, not a ministers debate. And if Boris Johnson can kind of like do other events, then he can come here, like especially considering that this has been on the books for a while. Michael Gove basically said that, oh, they don't want to like debate a conservative. And it was like, no, they just don't want to debate you, man. Like
you are not the prime minister.
But the funny thing was then like Boris Johnson, like, I don't know who at the Conservative Party headquarters just decided to be a good idea to like extend Stanley Johnson, his also extremely weird father.
Just the fact that it's not him is crazy. If this happened in America, like you would be shamed out of the country.
Right.
Even Pete Buttigieg shows up to the debate, you know?
Exactly, right. And it was just like, this is not even kind of like a really intense question. Like British media is like very timid, and they've also been like very timid towards Boris Johnson, like historically. They've kind of let him get away with like saying things that have been untrue about his time as like mayor of London, his like mayor of London record, which is like abysmal because under his kind of administration, London basically turned into a surveillance state, but like overspent on like fucking CCTV and like extremely powerful water cannons that could like kill people if you used them, and they had to like sell them back. Like
we're terribly sorry about the water cannons.
They're just too powerful. Just like my debate skills, they're just too strong.
I wanted a funny hose. We meant to order funny hoses.
So like his record is really, really bad, but like no one's really like he's been given like a really easy ride, and the fact that like I think today a poll came out to show that like even if they won based on these numbers, it would be like this wafer thin majority compared to like where they were like last week. It really just goes to show that this guy who was supposed to be like this relatable, fun loving, you know, person, like is
fun
just
loving, drinks. He drinks all the time. He's so fun.
I mean, probably, yeah. I mean, like
that's just like the like advanced analysis double speak for just like this guy is a mess. He's fun. Teens will like him. You can't leave children near him.
He's a fun guy, and he just looks at young women in a slightly weird way while reciting Herodotus. It's fine.
Yes.
It's cool. It's like what normal people do.
I believe Anders has something pulled up for that.
So I think that's like a potted history. There's like a lot more probably. I guess like one thing to probably we could talk about now, but probably will come up later, is like what happened yesterday, because yesterday was like a real shit show for Boris Johnson and the whole Conservative Party, and I think has really done like a number.
Yeah,
to
I definitely want to ask
figures.
about that in a second. But something that I have been sort of surprised by, and maybe this is mostly my perception, but it seems like the Trump-Johnson comparison is sort of oven ready, if you will. It's just got sort of like teed up for the press to run with. But I haven't been seeing that much of it, in the U.S. or the U.K. Occasionally,
and they continue to look like that.
Their
the
hair
entire
is the
time.
Same. They both come from privileged backgrounds.
Like,
they're both
people
racist,
don't look
but
like that.
They really this comparison, the sense of urgency that we hear from the establishment press in the U.S. about getting Trump out of office doesn't seem to be there in the UK. Is that first of all, do you agree with that analysis? And second of all, do you think that has to do with the sort of existential threat to the powers that be in the UK that Jeremy Corbyn poses?
I think Trump's hair is a lot better. It's thicker for one thing. Boris Johnson's hair is just like really thick and like unkept and just like unmaintained. And the thing that I've learned about like the Trump stuff is that like, say what you will about the man, he like cares a bit too much about his appearance sometimes in like kind of weird ways.
That's true. He's beautiful.
So like underneath the kind of like the toupee might be the same, but like Trump definitely cares a lot more about how he looks.
Did you see the pic of him as Rocky?
Yes, yeah, like that.
That's what he looks like.
Yeah, he's jacked.
Yeah,
he's jacked and swollen. Like all of us got very horny when we saw it, and none of us thought it was weird.
Yeah.
So, and like I think the similarities come in the sense that like these are both people who are like very entitled. They come from like landed dynasties. They both kind of just say absolutely like weird and insane stuff and seem to like get away with it. And that kind of has forged a lot of their personality. But I think the second part, Anders, like, is a really interesting one, because you're completely right in like, I think Boris still like for all his like oafishness, sort of still kind of to a certain like class of like media people sort of represents like a kind of continuity, right?
He plays an elite role. Like he claims to be a smart person. He doesn't speak like Donald Trump speaks in the simple, short words that repeat themselves and are about toilets a lot.
And he also like embodies the aesthetic of like a smart person by like British media standards, i.e. this is like an Oxford...
Sad!
Right, this is like an Oxford educated person who used to like edit an establishment magazine, albeit like a fucking racist establishment magazine, and can kind of, and has spent like his time as mayor of London like schmoozing with everyone at like the fucking Evening Standard, with a newspaper that was like is edited by a former colleague of his, George Osborne. So like he still, and like I guess this is also where the stuff of like the BBC comes in. So there's like a lot of criticism about like the BBC's political team and how much pressure they're actually putting on him, and also how much of an easy time he's been given by like particular reporters, and like whether that's done consciously or whether that's just done because British media people are like fucking goofballs is a question that like, you know, divides people. But the point is that like he's been given a really easy ride, I think, because like he represents a kind of familiarity among an elite class.
What it reads as to someone who knows nothing about UK politics, just at first glance, is with your election of Corbyn and the Lib Dems and Johnson, and then our election of Bernie Sanders and the 20 people he's facing, you have like a clear class warfare angle going on where the media openly scorns Corbyn and hates everything he's about. Whereas ours is like a confused American class warfare where no one knows what class they are to begin with.
Right.
And just pretends he's not there because they don't know what to say about it, but they're mad.
Yeah, this is bad. Yeah, I think like, I mean, like Britain has always been a country where like class has sort of been like a primary focus. I don't know if that's like the right term, but like there's definitely been a class consciousness in the sense of like
first class country, the UK.
We've had like a history of a fucking landed gentry, right?
Well, you have lords and ladies and stuff, and we don't have anything like that. We just have like managers at Walmart. It's a terrible replacement.
You have like Adam Newman at WeWork.
Yeah.
The Prince of New York, about to like fall apart. Yeah, and I think like in Britain, like in America, one thing that I've kind of gotten, especially from like expats who've moved here, is like they still kind of believe that like America is like the land of opportunity, i.e. like if you work really hard enough, you'll get ahead here. Whereas like in Britain, it's like, yeah, you can work hard and you'll still be fucked because like some rich fucking totty with like a double-barreled name is always going to be like more wealthy than you because she'll be linked to like some fucking baron with like estates in, you know.
That honestly sounds nice because the bootstraps culture here is insufferable.
Yeah. There's at least like an awareness that like
when you take a car, like the Lyft drivers are like hustling and they're talking to you about it, and then you get out of the car and you go to the bar. The bartender's talking to you about like, I have 4 shifts. What are you doing? You're like, I don't know what I'm doing. You just feel terrible all the time.
Yeah. Well, or just like when people kind of ask you, what jobs do you have?
This is partially a New York City thing too, because I mean there are places where nobody does shit, but
whereas like in the UK, I think there is this awareness that like, look, regardless of what you do in your life, there's always going to be people who there's always going to be like a certain class of people that are just going to just have it easy, like the fail sons,
right?
Because their dads are like fucking barons and they own like estates and stuff. So like class has always
they've come on a skeleton you're not allowed to see. That actually might be an American thing.
I mean, probably like a British, probably like
they're
British
probably all in on it, you know.
Well, one of
so
those
like class has always been like perennial, right?
Yeah, and one of those barons, I guess, is Stanley Johnson, Boris's old man, who was on TV a few weeks ago, and at first he's admonishing the hosts for implying that his son, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, has lied, and then goes on to say that he doesn't think most people in the UK can spell the word Pinocchio. Did that cause any dip in the polls for the Conservatives?
I don't know if that caused a dip. So I've been in New York for like the whole time that this election has kind of been, for most of the time that this has been going on. So I don't know if
trying really hard not to pay attention to this.
I
just dragged from podcast to podcast and forced to explain your country.
It is why I came here. I wake up at like 1 p.m. maybe midday UK time. It's like, oh shit's been going down. So like I tried to kind of catch up with stuff. I don't think that really affected the polls that much. I think that I think that's kind of what people expected from Boris Johnson. And also I think that was like, it was a very like media related story. And I don't think like the British people really care that much about media related stuff. So the whole idea that he didn't show up to a debate was kind of like, for some people, it's, you know, it was, okay, this is just more proof that the guy's a coward, but like, fine. Then you have a group of people who are like, well, this guy is going to get Brexit done. And like,
because he's a mad dog.
Right. That's all he cared. Like,
he plays by his own rules.
All we care about is Brexit. We don't really care about anything else. So even if this guy like does fuck skeletons, like we're still going to vote for him. Like there's a guy in the UK who like, it's too much to go into, but like his name is Darren Grimes and,
okay.
Extremely funny name.
You have my attention.
And he looks like a child, but he was like one of the kind of only young people, quote unquote, who was a pro-Brexit person. And he did this amazing tweet a couple of weeks ago, which was just like, Boris Johnson could like piss in my grand's letterbox, my grandmother's letterbox, and I would still vote for him because he's getting Brexit done.
My God. Ivan Ooze. What have you done?
And I mean, I read it and I was kind of just like, well, if you're into piss play, man, just like say it, right? You don't need to like.
And he did.
And he did. Like,
this is a moment where we have to stand back and respect the process.
But I think that like that really touches on something, which is that there are a lot of people who I did this tweet a long time ago, which was just like, retweet this if you would suck a dick for Brexit, and it got like 70 or 80 retweets, and I was just like.
Oh no!
Cool. Okay, that's great. Like
now they expect me to follow through on this.
There are a lot of people who would do a lot of things for just for the quote unquote ideological Brexit because they want to own the libs. So then you have that camp, and then you have like another, and then you have like the final camp who are kind of just like, we just kind of want Boris to kind of get in because when he gets, if he gets in with like an empowered majority, then he can kind of continue this sort of neoliberal agenda of like privatization and open market capitalism and stuff like that. And like the thing that they didn't like about Theresa May, our previous prime minister, was that she wasn't as kind of gung-ho about this stuff. Whereas Boris Johnson has this very long history of like placating to like very extreme elements of the conservative movement. Whether he sincerely believes that or not is like a different thing, because again, this is also a guy who like doesn't really have a lot of principles beyond getting to where he wants to go.
Which again, the Donald Trump comparison is 1-to-1.
Right.
Because he's not doing anything for like the MAGA truck nuts people.
Yeah. I think with the Trump stuff, though, like, I don't think Trump had this long game plan of like, I want to be president. I think he
Absolutely not.
Right. He was just like, fuck it, I'm bored, I'm going to do this. And then accidentally.
I've lost my TV show.
Whereas Boris Johnson historically, like, has been like, I want to be prime minister since he was fucking like 10 years old. Again, because of that like sense of fucking like private school entitlement.
Yeah.
So this is a guy who's basically like planned his whole life around this.
He's done such a fucking bad job. It's
whereas
crazy.
like Trump's just done it better, and he like didn't even think about it. He was just bored.
But what was
He is really exceptional. But
what was Johnson's thinking with calling an election at this point, though? Because he didn't really have to do that. Why does he really think?
He kind of
Okay.
did. He kind of did.
also,
So, like,
how does calling an election work? You get to just decide when there's an election?
I mean, kind of. When you're prime minister, you get like this. You can kind of get. You have to get like 2/3 of the House of Commons.
do they happen regularly, but you can call them early? Or they're just whenever we decide?
No, so it used to be, there used to be like a fixed term. There still is like a fixed term parliament. So like legislation that was passed in, I think 2000, in the early 2010s, I can't remember the year, where, but this was like during the coalition when the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats first came into power. They passed a legislation which was like the Fixed Term Parliament Act, i.e. you couldn't call an election unless you had 2/3 of the House of Commons like vote for it. And that parliament would go on for 5 years. And this has been the first time that the Fixed Term Parliament Act has been broken because like 2/3 of the House of Commons like voted for an election. And I think most of that was because of Brexit. It was
Right.
because like there's been various kind of deals that have like passed to and from the House of Commons. There was an amendment that was passed which basically said that like Britain couldn't go out of the EU with like no deal, like a deal had to go through. Then Boris Johnson like negotiated, but Theresa May negotiated a deal. She came back and no one was voting
And the
for
Congress
it.
can't handle these deals, so they gotta mix it up.
The deal was too much, so then they basically made her resign to get Boris Johnson in. Boris Johnson said that he would negotiate a better deal, came back with a worse deal, one that like didn't allow like access to particular markets in a way that like Theresa May's did, and then he couldn't pass it. So he was kind of like, well, the only way I'm going to pass a Brexit deal is to kind of have an election and have, because like the Conservatives also had a really wafer thin majority, and this goes back to 2017 when Jeremy Corbyn did a lot better in the election than people thought he would. So the initial idea the Conservatives had would be like Theresa May, who was like this kind of bastion of stability and being sensible and, you know, Christian. She would come back with this big majority, and Brexit would pass, and the Conservatives would just like have a free run for like the next.
And they
decade.
thought they were going to squash him,
Right.
and then the absolute lad
because
did
he
it.
just like grows vegetables and makes like delicious jams and stuff.
Yes.
And who eats jam? Like no one eats jam.
No one in
now,
England
right?
eats jam. Yeah.
I'm afraid to make a position either way. I do remember watching that and feeling very confused, but then he did it, and I was like, "This feels good." I couldn't tell you what happened.
I
but-
remember like when the exit poll came out and it showed that like Labour had basically like stopped the Conservatives from being able to do anything. There were like these 2 hours when like between the exit poll and when the first results came out, which were like the best hours. They were just like real kind of like golden hours. I'm trying to like think of a better term for it. But it was
better
great.
platinum hours.
Platinum hours. It was just great because like all the kind of like fucking pundits who had predicted for like months that Jeremy Corbyn was going to get wiped out and like the Labour Party was over and like all of this could have been avoided if we had just kind of brought in like some centrist shitbag who like wanted to just like means test more stuff.
Yeah.
That once that was done, like
Somebody had to eat
well,
tie
yeah.
on TV, but they didn't actually. He put it in his mouth, but was it his book or his tie? It was either a book or a tie, and they chewed on it and didn't actually swallow.
Yeah, that does not count as eating the tie, by the way.
Oh shit! No,
It misses several important parts of eating.
Eat the book, yeah. And now that guy has just become like a fucking like reactionary.
Oh, really?
It's like he became more reactionary after eating his book.
The book was full of what? It's actually not funny.
It's like something about eating like the glue that binds the pages that just like turns you into like fucking lunatic. But the thing is now they're doing the same thing. So like even like despite like the polls being worse for the Conservatives at this point of time than it was last year, you've still got people who are like writing in national newspapers being like, you know, this is going to be a Labour wipeout. This is going to be the end of the Labour Party. We were right all along.
And he's still down, but his acceleration is higher.
Yeah, and like
that's what's going on.
And we're in like a much better position, at least like at the time we were talking about. We're in a much better position now, and I don't like see it kind of recovering in the next day or so. So like my kind of prediction is that at the very like minimal, the Conservatives might gain a majority, but it won't be significant enough to like do anything meaningful.
Nice.
Right? You know, that kind of opens up a new can of worms, but I don't kind of see this thumping majority that they had all kind of assumed would happen like 6 weeks ago or even 4 weeks ago.
And from 2017, in terms of like momentum's on the ground operation, do you think that has improved and put them in a better chance to get Labour in power?
So I don't know too much about like the ground game just because I'm not in the UK, but like
I am on vacation. They won't leave me alone.
But like I know some of like the Trash Future guys have been out canvassing, and like I know like Momentum people have as well. I think that like Momentum have been really extraordinary at like the ground game because they just know how to organize really well. So like they've employed, so Labour have always been good at like the ground game. They've always been good at like bringing people out.
Who is Momentum again?
Momentum is kind of like the grassroots activist movement.
It's like the DSA to the Labour.
Kind of. They're associated with Labour, but they're not like directly kind of like part of a Labour group. But they've kind of done extraordinary things in relation to like maintaining Labour's position on the left and kind of proposing policy ideas. They have like they're like a really interesting group of people just generally, and they hold like very cool and interesting events.
Interesting. Now, a fun game you can play at home if you're listening along is what questions does Alex know the answer to and he's just being a good host? And then what questions does he genuinely have no idea what he's fucking talking about?
I actually got one that I hear a lot and I don't know what the heck it means because it sounds cool, but apparently it's bad. Universal credit. What is that?
Sounds cool.
I hear it's bad.
I love Universal Studios.
That's the first time I've heard like universal credit like being associated with coolness.
We just like Universal.
Well, I'm standing by it. Don't know what it is.
Universal credit was like this plan of like simplifying the benefits, like the welfare system. So like you would just get one payment rather than like multiple different payments. But it just has turned out like from its inception and like.
It's just a way to squash entitlements.
Right. And it's a way of kind
That's
of like,
what it sounds like it is.
You know, it like limits people from like access to like very specific types of funds they need. Like there have been cases where like single mothers haven't been like able to access like money for childcare or that they haven't received enough money. And obviously like things cost different things in different places, right? So like having a standard credit where, you know, things don't take you as far in like London as it does in like, you know, a suburb in Newcastle, like it probably isn't a good thing.
That's what people are afraid UBI will turn into here.
Right.
Like Andrew Yang's entire thing of like, don't you want $1,000? But at the cost of what, Andrew?
Yeah, like inflation is a thing, and like, you know, famously.
What about my disability, Andrew?
But like it follows. I mean, it follows like a very Andrew Yang type of principle, which is the idea that like if you simplify things and make things easier for like wealthy people to understand, then they're more likely to go for it. But like the fact that universal credit has caused like tens of thousands of people to like suffer, thousands of people to die.
Is it already passed, or is it?
I mean, yeah, it's already passed. Because it's been like it's been there for I can't even remember how many years, but for a long time it's been there.
Is this Boris Johnson's work as well?
No, this was before. This was David Cameron's work.
Okay,
this was like a David Cameron like simplifying, modernizing Britain project.
You're off the hook for this one, Boris.
Well,
this is the one. Take a break for 5 minutes.
Boris Johnson hasn't really done anything by way of passing legislation except for like. I mean, basically hasn't really done anything. He's just like insulted a bunch of like foreign dignitaries, written a racist book, a racist novel.
We do have some fun clips of that Andrew sent me. Do you want to go through these?
Sure. Yeah. Well,
we did like a full reading of his book on Trash Future, like a 3-part series.
This isn't. I don't think this is the book.
This is not the book. Okay.
The BuzzFeed article.
Yeah, that is. Yeah,
that's a.
There's another one.
Wait,
there's a new.
Not the new one. Yeah, not the new one.
It's just
There's
so
a
much.
new racist thing he wrote.
It's like another racist thing that he just happened to do.
Okay, Anders, do you want to break down the BuzzFeed one?
Yeah, so Boris Johnson, there's so much Bojo happening this week. It's hard to stay on top
So
of.
much Bojo.
It's going to be...
But he wrote an article. This came out in the, I believe it was a Spectator, in 2003. And he's talking about going to India, former British colony. And he's on a flight from British Airways. And these are his words. I awoke to found a sweet-faced Chinese air stewardess standing over me in my aisle seat. Please, sir, said the BA girl, please come with me. I have found a better seat from you in row 52.
It does not say please. It
All right.
says please. It's written down please.
Well, I'm yes.
Look at
I'm
this.
debating how I should I do the
Jesus
accent
Christ.
that-
Oh my God.
Should I do the Bojo accent or should I do Bojo doing the Chinese
No,
flight
you should.
attendant?
You don't have to do an accent, but if
Okay.
he writes the word "please,"
You can probably
pretty
guess. Yeah,
important.
you can probably guess.
Please,
what
sir,
happened.
please come with me. Basically, and a flight attendant sees he's next to his children, and she doesn't know they're his children, and so offers him a different seat, and he wants to say yes, but his kiddies are like, no, that's a papa, and so he has to sit with them.
And he's also very horny for her. Is the other backdrop of this?
All his writing is extraordinarily horny. Like,
Is that just like a Churchillian thing?
I don't know. I feel like I feel like it's a very like British establishment thing. Like lots of there are like a good amount of like British establishment.
If I
authors.
desire the milking girl, she's mine.
But there's a lot of like establishment British authors who just like can't help, like especially like in Britain, but like just can't help but like be horny or like to talk about their dicks in like really inappropriate situations.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
I mean, which we do love. I mean, we don't have to read this whole thing, but it does end with Veli Solly.
the way you said that
That's awesome.
is funnier than the Asian accent.
Well, good, because I'm not doing one as an
neither.
ally,
Me
Anders, because I'm helping
Jeez.
take down Boris Johnson's 2003 article.
Like it's not even like the worst one that he's written. This is like I hear this and I'm like, yeah, I mean it's awful, but also like if we're comparing it to like number one, his fucking novel, and number two, all the stuff that he's just written about like watermelon smiles, pickaninnies,
Ooh.
just using like also these very old school
That's
smiles.
colorful and racist.
Right. And it's kind of just this like it's a real window into like just journalism at that time.
Yeah,
because
you should
like,
see his Family Guy packet. Fucking out of this world.
One of the weirdest ones.
He has the power. He could have been honest.
His supporters have tried to defend him by being like, "Oh, that was just like a really unwoke period." Did you ever watch South Park?
Yeah, it was just.
To which I'm like, no, because I went to religious school.
Yes.
But one of his.
But it was just like, yeah.
But he had a real life guffaw just yesterday, which was just delicious.
Real life
It was so
guffaw alert.
IRL GUFF.
I can't do it, but it's like the kind of guffaw, which is like a very like British nasal, like.
This goes into our segment of IRL guffaws. Play the music.
I wish Milo can do it really well. I can't do any like British stuff, but yeah, like okay.
Well, yeah, so he's being interviewed about
Damn.
the NHS because where do you even start with this? There was a kid who was on a bunch of coats on the floor of a hospital,
Yes.
kid who had like pneumonia or something. And Boris Johnson refuses to look at the picture of the boy that the reporter is like trying to get him to look at. And eventually...
Well, it would make him sad.
Yeah, it would. Actually, no, I don't think it would. It would just reveal how not sad he is and how completely unaffected he is by the plight of the lower classes. But he takes the phone from the reporter and puts it in his pocket, and then
Continues doing the inside.
That's what you do when you're the adult in the room.
Yeah.
You have to confiscate the yo-yos.
And that wasn't even like the worst part of his day. Like I kind of thought that was bad, but maybe he could get away with it just by like pretending to be a bit of a buffoon, but kind of ultimately making some sort of empty promise.
Oops,
But,
did
like,
I steal your phone?
Did I nick your phone, governor? did I nick your phone?
It's my streetwise reflexes at it again.
I grew up in the UK and I grew up in the UK and I can't do any of the accents.
I can only do Cockney, which is not helping me today.
But it's still better than me. Like, didn't nick your phone, governor.
no, he said, "I apologize for taking your phone." That's what he said.
But like, I was watching
Damn,
this
that's
and I
good.
was thinking to myself that like, he could probably get out of this pretty easily, right? He could just say that, look, I was kind of like a bit overwhelmed and I took the phone, I'm sorry. And like, just make some empty promise about like, look, I feel like really bad for this kid. And like, we're going to make sure we invest like a load of money so that this never happens again. Like it could have been really easily resolved. But like, number one, he didn't do that. He just like kept silent afterwards. And then
like he's keeping the phone. It's his phone now.
It's my phone now. But then it got worse because like then they sent this guy called Matt Hancock, to Leeds General Hospital. And I like, if any of your fans listen to Trash Future, they'll know who Matt Hancock is. But like, I'll summarize it the best that I can. He's basically just like a very obedient Labrador if he was a person. Just like someone who's very optimistic and like, just like bright-eyed about like the world, completely oblivious to like its darkness. Believes that like everything can be made into a WeWork. He became famous for like doing parkour, but like doing parkour really badly.
This guy sounds great.
Right. And like just someone who just like is a really weird like tech accelerationist.
So did they have him do parkour professionally as like a politician?
Well, they made him parkour all the way to like Leeds General Hospital, like with Leeds Hospital, where this whole thing happened.
Yes.
And then when during the ride up there, like him and his assistants tried to kind of come to do damage control, and one of his assistants walked into like the hand of some like labor, like some protester, like a labor activist who was also like outside of the hospital.
Yeah, some like
and there was
WhatsApp exchange went out that was like, hey, if you're involved in
Right.
labor momentum, Matt Hancock's coming to this hospital, come here and protest him.
Yeah, so just right, which is like a fine thing to do, and like has happened.
It was
before, and,
portrayed
like,
as
that's
Jeremy Corbyn personally sending them like
he's sending his juntas out to like
Stop this beautiful display of parkour.
Art
of the West.
But then like some Tory kind of messaged again, like this goes back to the BBC, like messaged like the BBC's senior correspondent, like political correspondent, saying about like one of Matt Hancock's advisors just got punched in the face by a Labour activist. There was no evidence for this. There was no kind of like, there was no, backup source. The BBC's political correspondent, who like already is pretty close to the like Boris Johnson and his administration anyway, just tweets out that like, a Tory activist just said he got punched. Then that went around like all the kind of political reporters who just tweeted this thing out, like, and then about 20 minutes after that came out, and after like dozens of retweets and impressions basically saying that like labor activists are like violent, it turns out actually none of this happened at all, that his like Matt Hancock's goofy advisor walked into someone's like own hand by his own volition, and the whole story was like completely made up. So then at the end of the day, Boris Johnson not only had to deal with the fact that he's just nicked this governor's phone, but also that
that they're lying generally about,
and also just like that they're weak as shit, because like if you got bruised walking into someone's hand, like that's not Labour's problem, man. That's like, you need to drink more protein.
Look at their camp. They're stealing phones.
And there's also
they can't parkour. They're just telling fibs at large, which you are told not to do at boarding school.
Yeah, no, you don't tell a fib, otherwise you've got to go to the master's office, and no one wants
to go there.
No one wants to go to the master's
There's also
office.
a rumor being spread online that the boy in the hospital, that was completely faked.
Yeah.
It was
British QAnon. Oh my god, British QAnon is like incredible.
Follow the clues,
because they were like, yeah, this kid was like a plant, and like I was reading it last night. It's like everyone has just like lost their fucking minds over this. There were like a bunch of people pretending to be nurses who were like, yeah, he's wearing the mask like the wrong way around. But like none of these people are like fucking nurses, and they all like tweeted the same thing, which is like, as a former nurse who worked at like a general hospital, this very specific type of mask doesn't like breathe. I don't know the exact tweet, but like a Twitter user, like I can't remember his name, but he put out like 6 tweets that were basically exactly the same.
Wow.
All saying the same stuff. I am a former nurse, and then it got really close to like this.
Is there a British QAnon?
Kind of. I like British people love conspiracy theories.
Like you guys
anyway.
have Father
Well, there's
Christmas
Paul
and we
Joseph
have
Watson.
Santa. Is there like a? There's Paul
I guess
Joseph
he's
Watson.
not anonymous.
Yeah, but Paul Joseph Watson isn't really like a QAnon guy.
He's
I
like
think,
Alex Jones.
Well, he was like he used to when he was a QAnon guy. He used to be cool. Like when he was a conspiracy
he used
theory
to
guy,
be cool, man.
he used to be like a cool dude. But now he's just like a lame guy who makes videos about why like Scorsese movies are filled with like SJW propaganda.
Okay.
He sold out.
Because everyone has capitulated to like the SJWs, and he made like 4 videos about how like Joker is like the greatest movie of all time. It's kind of like, I don't know, it's just like become like very boring now.
Yeah, that's sad. He's like not talking about the frogs being gay anymore.
Well, the NHS
Just took the
NHS
paycheck.
has been a pretty major issue in the election.
Yes.
It was revealed, of course. Well, first I want to ask, there were these documents that Corbyn revealed on stage at one of the debates.
Yeah, the compromise.
That the parts of the National Health Service are being sold off to the United States.
Well, not that they were being sold off, but that the NHS would be open for like doing deals and doing.
They'd
sales.
be open in a trade deal,
open on the table,
which does look bad.
We're getting Dunkin' Donuts,
right?
I went to Dunkin' for the first time yesterday, and I wasn't impressed.
Oh no,
no,
you got to go in
bad.
Massachusetts. Yeah, it only counts there.
Thank you for saying that.
I was just like, I'm trying to do like as many American things as I can in my last week here. So like, I went to Dunkin' last night. And I sat in this really depressing Dunkin' in like somewhere in like Bergen. Is it Bergen Hill?
The New York Dunkin' Donuts are not representative of Dunkin' Donuts on a whole.
Okay.
The inner city Dunkin' Donuts are grimy places. You got to go like in the middle of the suburbs after you've drank a Boris Johnson amount of liquor and you can't eat. You can't digest like human food anymore.
Well, next time I accidentally end up in Albany.
Well, so one American,
yeah, exactly. Albany.
One American thing that is happening is for some reason we have unleashed our best airport book authors on this theory about the NHS, about this information that's been revealed. First, Malcolm Gladwell, author of Outliers, came in with some...
I know him from the airport.
He came in with some idiosyncratic argument about pricing.
Yeah.
And then now Lionel Trilling, I believe is her name, who...
Is it Lionel Shriver?
Yeah, not Trilling. Is saying that
Close one.
like these... They don't really know what they're talking about, it seems. They know like almost less than I do. But for
Lionel
some reason they're given
always,
a platform in the UK. Like why was Mitch Albom gonna like come on and say we should completely privatize the NHS? What's going on here?
I think there's a lot of British guys who still think Malcolm Gladwell's like a really smart dude.
The 5 people you meet in hospice.
Right. But also just like you know, the kind of like the not like Notting Hill middle class people who are kind of like, oh, I read what was that? What was
Outliers.
like his first, like the kind of when you like practice things
Outliers.
for a really long time, you get good at it.
That's Outliers.
Right.
Outliers. It's Outliers.
Which was like remarkable to me because I was just like, you know, that's how I can become like the world's #1 new metal DJ.
Yes. And you still could.
It's got to practice.
If you're willing to commit the time, you could.
Yeah, like I saw like the clip about Malcolm Gladwell basically saying that like you have to open up the NHS for competition and like in any feasible. And the thing was, he was right. Like he was right, not in the sense of like that's how the NHS will get better, but like in any sort of trade circumstance, the NHS would have to be open because the Americans have said it, and you didn't need the documents to kind of make that clear. Like there are like American trade envoys or former trade envoys who have basically said that, yeah, like if we ever do a post-Brexit deal with Britain, like we're going to go for their fucking like fully built medical, like, you know, their fully built like medical service when we are a country with like, you know, loads of fucking like pharma companies.
Don't
right?
you want our cutting edge medical technology?
I mean, I just think to myself, like, didn't we like have this conversation with like Martin Shkreli when that stuff happened? Like, where he was just charging like obscene amounts for like very basic drugs, and like we had this conversation about how drugs are manufactured and how much like vulture funds sort of like
right, but that was just about owning that guy. There's no moment of self-reflection ever here,
right? You know, there might be pharma guys who are really nice and not like have the weird obsession with
it's
like
weird because there aren't. You meet so many of them here.
You know, but Malcolm Gladwell,
skeletons.
Malcolm Gladwell is one of those guys who are like, yeah, Martin Shkreli was an outlier. He just practiced for way longer than everyone else. You know, Lionel Shriver is like a completely different thing, and I'm not going to go into that. But yeah, the documents are an important one because the discourse around that was completely insane. Because these were documents that had been like public for a long time. They had been on Reddit, and like they'd also been reported on a bit by people who worked for the British Healthcare Journal, which is like an industry journal full of like very good journalists like who have been covering the privatization of the NHS. But you know, no one in like the fucking mainstream media like reads that, so it was kind of glossed over.
I just want to say I love recovering documents from Reddit.com. I am presenting to the board documents that have acquired Reddit gold.
So these documents have been around for a long time, and the problem was like no one really knew who the source was, right? They didn't know like how accurate the source was. They didn't really know So there was a lot of stuff like, oh, these documents came from Russia. They came from like the hack was from Russia, and it didn't
which cannot be trusted.
And it didn't really address the points that like these documents were not fake, right? It'd be a different conversation if these were like fake documents, because the way that the discourse was kind of formed in the UK was like, oh, this is like foreign interference in our election, which is kind of like, okay, you might have a point if these documents were fake and they were trying to deliberately mislead people.
Right, but they're just actual documents.
But these are real documents. These are real documents with like the fucking like health trade minister, like actual words on there. No one is denying that they're like...
It's one of those situations where like the worst guy you know just made an excellent point.
Except in most cases, it wasn't like the worst guy. Like very like Jeremy Corbyn is like the best guy, and he made a very good point, which is that the NHS was like...
if you're a liberal, I meant Russia as a whole is the worst guy you know.
Is your cat gonna like knock everything down?
No, he's not gonna knock it down. He's just gonna circle, and that's part of the show.
Okay.
So, yeah,
when we have to wrap it up, he circles the laptop.
So Corbyn has
wait, so Anders,
he has really made this an issue. Like he's used the documents on stage at the debate. Do you think that under a different leadership, like Tony Blair, or even Ed Miliband, they would have like struggled with whether or not to actually make an issue out of it? And by the time they were ready to do so, it probably would have left the news.
I don't know about Blair, because Blair was also someone who like instituted PFI, which was like the beginning of like really formal privatization. The idea that like that separate NHS hospitals could do like deals with like not just pharma companies, but like, vulture, like, VC firms and everything.
Right.
So, for Blair, it would be like, damn, these documents are great and we should like do more deals because we want to make an efficient NHS.
I made a deal.
Ed's a comrade. Like, he's like, I don't know if you guys listen to his podcast now, but like, he's become like a comrade now, which is great. And I think that like, it was really, his leadership was like pretty sad, because I think he came in at like a very weird, like the end of New Labour, and like trying to figure out what is Labour supposed to be. And he was also someone who kind of wanted to make everyone happy. Yeah. So he was trying to kind of like placate the right. So I think for him, like, I mean, his lines during the election were like, that you can't trust the Tories with the NHS, which is completely true. But he didn't really it didn't really go beyond that. It didn't really go beyond. I think for him, it was just like, we're just going to invest more in the NHS because we love the NHS so much. Whereas I think with Corbyn, like Corbyn's gone a few steps further to be like, yeah, we're going to invest a hell of a lot more in the NHS.
Right.
But what we're also going to do is like stop privatization, like stop kind of like veering privatization coming in.
Right.
Because Brexit or no Brexit, like.
And you have to get gender surgery now.
Yeah, like. There is like a running joke that like, but what people are really afraid of is like that, like a very Jack Jeremy Corbyn is going to like make
you get the surgery.
It's going to force everyone to like become transgender.
He just shows up at your house on a train. It's the same train they drink the Coors Light on that goes through the mountain.
There was like
it's been nationalized.
There was someone, I can't remember the exact story, but there was someone who like actually said, I think this was like during when Corbyn was kind of like talking about like universal vaccinations and stuff, and the idea that he wanted kind of every child to be vaccinated regardless of like to get to broaden access to healthcare. And someone was just like, was Jeremy Corbyn going to show up at my house with like an injection and force me to get vaccinated?
I'm ready for you, Jace. I got me nose out, Jace. I feel like a pool cue was the weapon of choice for this person.
But like, yeah, he like lives in Essex. And, but no, like I think what Labour have been really good at is that because this is still billed as like the Brexit election, and Labour have a very good position on Brexit, which is that like, look, the way that things are going, like there's been so many kind of things that have been misleading, and like no one's really known what the specifics are. What we're going to do is like negotiate a better deal, which kind of means that that all our kind of public services are protected, but we will still leave the European Union if you want to. But noticing that like 3 years have passed and a lot of things have changed, like it's probably worth reassessing that rather than kind of going for the gung-ho. 3 years ago, everyone voted for this very vague notion of leaving the European Union.
Sure.
And people voted for different reasons, but we should still stick to this one
and
plan.
That's one of the frustrating things in the press there. It's like they're accusing him of being wishy-washy, and like this is one issue that has to be dealt with carefully, because could completely destroy the British economy. And this is one issue where he is sort of I guess, trying to have it both
Yeah.
ways. But on every other issue, is taking
Right.
very, very bold stances.
Yeah, I mean, also like this has been like a really messy part of like living in the UK, but also he's been like, you know, you have one side of like the media who are kind of saying that like, oh, Jeremy Corbyn is going to like facilitate Brexit because he hasn't gone for like full hard Remain, i.e., let's pretend like the past 3 years this never happened, and then on the other side, you've got people who kind of say that, oh, Jeremy Corbyn like wants to Remain completely, like he's kind of just wants to betray the people, and it's like, both things are not true, but there's like still this speculation that Jeremy Corbyn secretly voted Leave, and no one's saying anything about it because like they're afraid of being called racist or something like that.
He wants to form a new communist international.
Right. Actually,
you're all wrong.
Right. Actually, that's what he wants to do. He wants to like set up pogroms like all over Newcastle, or like this. Like
that is pretty fucked up that he wants to do that.
It's crazy. It's like you're crazy for this one, Jez.
That's all we hear about. Like if you are like a Twitter guy in America, it's just does he want to do pogroms or not?
Does he want to do
Does he want to
Maoism?
nationalize sausages? Which was
yeah, that was like another thing. It's like, yeah, would you nationalize sausages? It's just like, it's sort of like Labour have really kind of
the people aren't ready for the state's next generation sausage.
It might like use like less sawdust than the ones that you can buy.
That is true. Like sausages, hot dogs are like the last food to say will get worse under nationalization.
Yeah. Right. Well, one last election question, then I'll let you get out of here.
Sure.
There's been some attention paid to this concept of tactical voting, which is sort of an attempt to keep the Tories out of power by voting for whatever the closest party is in that certain constituency, which in some cases are the Liberal Democrats. So there's some people who are sympathetic to Labor who are saying, no, you got to vote Lib Dem here because the Labor doesn't stand a chance. But isn't it the case that the Lib Dems would form a government with the Tories and not Labor?
Not necessarily, but like, I think I know like that's so I think there's like two questions. The first is about where does tactical voting work, and the second thing is like, can we trust the Liberal Democrats? So the first one is like, I think a pretty straightforward one, which is that for the majority of Lib Dems, at least that I'm aware of, there is this kind of consensus that like we don't want the Conservatives back in like government, and there are lots of Lib Dems who are very distraught by the idea that like when their previous leader like went to join like the Conservatives and was part of like the austerity program, but like that was going to be the end of the Liberal Democrats, and like people like Vince Cable were really kind of instrumental in at least kind of like maintaining like the Lib Dems as a party. Now, the thing with like Jo Swinson, who's like the leader of like the Liberal Democrats right now, besides like being ineffective, also has like a really vague kind of, agenda, because when she's been asked, like, would you do, like, she's kind of been, her position is like, we're going to fight for every seat because I want to be prime minister of the country. But
that ain't going to happen.
I think what she fails to, but that's not going to happen. Like, even in the best case scenario, like, that is not going to happen. You're going to be like, the best case scenario for the Lib Dems is that you're going to be kingmakers. Mm-hmm. So the decision is like, who do you want to be like the kingmakers of? Like, do you want to, or who do you want to like assist? Do you want to assist the Labour Party, or do you want to assist the Conservative Party? Now, Jo Swinson is kind of just like stuck to her line, which is like, I want to be prime minister and I'm not going to think about any of those things. And then when
winning mindset, America,
and then like, Jo Swinson moved to New York and go work in WeWork. We had this joke on Trash Future that like Jo Swinson will she'll be like deputy prime minister for like one term and then go like become like head of TikTok or something.
Absolutely, that's a vertical move.
But when she's been asked about like Labour, she's kind of like dismissed it by saying that, we wouldn't want to join the Labour Party while Jeremy Corbyn is leader because of like the anti-Semitism.
Because of how anti-Semitic it
right.
is.
Which again, like I think is like a disingenuous point, but it also like fails to understand what it would mean if you were in a coalition, i.e. that Jeremy Corbyn would have like won the election. Like he would be like, he would have the right to kind of form a government. Mm-hmm. And also like, if you join a coalition government with like Boris Johnson of all people.
When did the anti-Semitic line like become solid? Because I remember hearing it a year or two ago, and it was just like, this is annoying. This keeps happening.
Shortly after he got elected, because Jeremy Corbyn did like a bunch of stuff with like Press TV, like the Iranian channel Press TV.
You had to wear a badge if you were Jewish.
Yeah, I mean, and like there were also like lots of rumors that like, oh, he's kind of had dinner with like people from Hamas and everything.
Right.
It kind of really became, but it's kind of really solidified, I think, actually towards like 2017. And it's sort of just like stuck. And I think, I mean, when we talk about anti-Semitism, like it is an important thing. I think that like, I don't think that we should kind of
dismiss it completely.
Dismiss it or kind of think that like there wasn't an anti-Semitic like problem with anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, i.e. that there were like definitely members who said things that were very, very anti-Semitic, and it was right that they were kind of removed or investigated. And, you know, and as Corbyn admits, like that should have been done faster. He's issued like multiple apologies. So the fact that like people aren't taking these apologies, like that's on them. But I think it's also like, again, we go back to like, okay, well,
it has the same vibe of like in school, if someone just like calls you shit pants early on in the year and you're like, well, I don't have any shit on your pants, and then it turns out like you sat on a muffin or something where you're like, that was a muffin, but then you just get shit pants for 3 months and then you just are shit pants for 9 months. So it's out of your hands.
That seems like a very highly specific.
I could have happened to anyone, and it didn't happen to me. That's for sure.
I mean, all I wanted to add to that was that, like, if you look at like the alternative, which is like Boris Johnson, like the Conservatives have also had a very like they also have their own like share of like anti-Semitic issues to do with anti-Semitism,
including
right?
Boris Johnson writing a book
that
said Jews control the media. Yeah.
Yes, and just like the like employment of very anti-Semitic tropes, and the fact that like people are willing to acknowledge this, but be like, oh, you know, he's just that guy. He's just like, he went to Eton, like you can't really help it. Whereas Jeremy Corbyn,
he's just like that, man.
Jeremy Corbyn didn't even go to university. He just like hung out. He just hung out on his marrow farm. Like,
he was busy at the dart hall throwing things at pictures of Jews.
So I think like there's a lot of like disingenuity with the Lib Dem position. I think they know that. I think that like if Labour are able to kind of become the biggest party on Thursday and they do have to go in coalition, I think that tune will change.
Right.
But I think right now this is just very much like posturing from Jo Swinson, who knows that like if she joins a coalition with Boris Johnson and they do like Tory Lib Dem like Mark II, like they're basically putting all their chips on the idea that regardless of who they go in coalition with, they're going to demand a second referendum.
Right.
Jeremy Corbyn has already offered a second referendum, right? Regardless of whether the Lib Dems join them or not.
Right, but he's an anti-Semite.
And like he grows big marrows and like, you know, that's a bit sus. Like they do look, the way they look, man.
Have you seen them?
It's a bit sus.
Have you seen him look at a sausage?
Jeremy Corbyn has offered a second referendum, right? Regardless whether the Lib Dems join or not. So like, you know, he's basically said, I'm going to negotiate a deal and then we'll put it to the people and I'm going to stay out of it because ultimately it's not my decision. It's the decision of like people living in the UK. And all we're going to do is just make sure that like no one loses their fucking jobs or like their livelihoods by like us crashing out, or like that like loads of Europeans just don't get like deported, right? That's all we, you know, that's, which is a reasonable position I think to take. Whereas like if they go into coalition with the Conservatives, sure, like the Conservatives will be like, well, if you join us, we'll give you a second referendum and it'll be like a leave and remain referendum. But then the Lib Dems are putting all their chips on the idea that like an overwhelming number of people in the UK want to suddenly remain in the European Union. And that's like not true. The statistics show that that's not true.
The original vote shows that's not true.
Right. But also like the fact that like the Lib Dems haven't really made the surge, because if it was the case, then the Lib Dems would have made like a really significant surge, and they haven't done that. So
no, because they suck.
Right. So like it, you know, if I was Jo Swinson, it would be like, yeah, this is like a no-brainer to kind of, even if I don't like Jeremy Corbyn, this is a no-brainer to kind of get the thing that I want. Right.
Yes.
Yep.
But
and then we can focus on important things like trains, which is what this election should be about.
Trains are important, and it should be what this election should be about.
Yeah, well, here's hoping we'll get that Labour government that'll renationalize the rail and have that awesome meeting with Bernard in 10 Downing Street. Looking forward to that.
They'll take 2 trains and they'll leave different locations at different times, and you'll have to do math and find out when they get there.
That's where Andrew Yang will come in.
He has the pin. He has the math
Hussein,
pin.
where can people find you?
At H Kesvani on Twitter or on Trash Future, the podcast.
And check out his book. He's got a fucking book.
Oh shit! Yeah, I wrote a book, didn't I? Yeah.
This is the second time it happened where you have somebody on the show who wrote a book who just doesn't remember doing it.
It wasn't even that long ago. It was like in May when I published it.
It's a new book.
Tired. Yeah, no, it's called Follow Miyaki, The Online World of British Muslims. You can buy it mainly in Britain, but you can also order it online. I don't know where. I think you can get it from Barnes & Noble now. So like, yeah, buy it, please. I need to pay for Dual Pods. So.
Great coffee table book.
it is a good coffee table book. It absorbs like a lot of liquid. So.
All right. And
It's
follow
durable.
me at Anders Lee here on Twitter. Check out Redacted Tonight. Got segments coming at you every week. Alex?
Hi, follow me on Twitter at Patak Jokes. I put all my stand-up shows up there. Listen to my anime podcast, Ballin' Out Super. We have comedians on and make them watch anime and then see how it made them feel.
I really want to be on that show.
And Hussein's going to be on it soon.
All right. It's finished.
Thank you
finished.
so much.